and welcome back to another video of book reviews. This is your social justice lending library, so if you want to borrow any of these books, just let me know. This is our second video of today, August 6, 2022, on the Gregorian calendar, and like usually happens whenever we have any travel coming up, I like to read about the place that we're going, starting with the like normal, anytime there's a trip coming up, I like to read about the place that we're going, starting with the indigenous peoples of the region. So this year, our family has a trip planning a trip to Eastern Tennessee. It's for a wedding. And I actually had a head start on Tennessee because I had already read a couple of books about Tennessee a couple of years ago. One of them was Tennessee's Indian Peoples by Ronald M. Satz, which is mostly about the Cherokee. And the other one, which I can't find right now, I think it must be in the shed, is called Tennessee Strings, which is by Charles K. Wolfe, and that is a history of the origin of country music, which was a very interesting book. So there was a little bit of background already, but I thought let's read a little bit more about Tennessee. And then as I was reading, I realized that Tennessee is a very, very big state, and it's got different regions, and the region we're going is up in the mountains. And so in that sense, that area has a lot more in common with Eastern Kentucky, with Western North Carolina, West Virginia, Western Virginia areas. Basically Appalachia, than it does with Nashville or further out in Memphis. So I started narrowing my research a little bit to kind of Appalachia, and of course looking for information about the stuff I'm interested in, activism, social movements, that sort of thing. But I did start with the Cherokee Nation and the Trail of Tears, which is by Theda Purdue and Michael D. Green. This is actually part of a series, the Penguin Library of American Indian History. And so we also have this one, the Shawnees and the War for North America, part of that same series. Just because of this one, I would really want to read the rest of the books in the series. And I think we all kind of know the history of the Cherokee, at least most of them being forced out of their ancestral homelands, which we usually think about as kind of northern Georgia, northwest Georgia, kind of as like the prime area. But of course, they had a very large territory. But beyond that, what else do we really know? And this book, it's not huge. It's not a documentary history. It's definitely digestible, but it gets into a lot more of the details about what happened, especially down in Georgia with the state legislation and the governor. Andrew Jackson, of course, had a big role to play on the national level, and the roles of missionaries, but also really focuses on what the Cherokee people and especially their leadership did themselves to try to stop it, to defend themselves, build alliances, organize, and then when all of that was ultimately unsuccessful, not all of it, because obviously there's still some Cherokee that were able to remain in North Carolina, but most of them didn't end up getting marched or some partly voted over to Oklahoma. What they did to kind of reestablish themselves there. So very, very sad story, but instrumental if you want to know anything about the history of the Cherokee people, especially, although it didn't take place a lot in Tennessee, and that was one of my learnings too, is that Cherokee, the Tennessee, what's now Tennessee, is part of their ancestral homeland, but there's also history of Yuchi people there, and of course other tribes. So start with the Cherokee Nation of Trail of Tears. Definitely recommend this one. I think the next one I read was called To Live Here You Have to Fight, and this one I actually bought from Highlander. It's not called the Highlander Folk School anymore. It's the Highlander Research and Education Center, I think. But this one was very interesting because it's called To Live Here You Have to Fight. How Women Led Appalachian Movements for Social Justice. How Women Led Appalachian Movements for Social Justice. It's by Jessica Wilkerson. And a lot of times when we think about the social movements in Appalachia, we think about Harlan County and the coal miners, and maybe about the environmental justice struggle around mountaintop removal, that sort of thing. But this book kind of picks up where the mining struggle, I don't want to say ended because it didn't really end, but kind of tapers off a little bit due to automation and that sort of thing. But it picks up really during the war on poverty, and it talks about how women, especially, were really leading the struggle to get war on poverty programs, social programs, government-funded programs into the impoverished areas of Appalachia. And this book focuses on eastern Kentucky, which is not too far from eastern Tennessee. But of course, it ties into the miners' struggle, ties into the environmental struggle, and really highlights the efforts of women, especially white women, to lead those efforts. The other interesting thing is that she acknowledges that most of the history of Appalachia, kind of starting with this one, right? Then that night comes to the Cumberlands, talk about Appalachia as backward and as suffering from cultural pathologies and stuck in time and that sort of thing, but a very, very white, poverty stricken area. So she acknowledges that it is not just because that's how it's always been. Obviously acknowledging the genocide and displacement of Native peoples, but also talking about how racial terror and terrorism really pushed out a lot of black communities. That it was what ended up giving Appalachia its predominantly white character. I really enjoyed this book. It was very good scholarship, and I thought there wasn't that much research about women activism up in Appalachia, but when you read the bibliography, there's actually a lot. Highlander, they sent me this bookmark, and it's Septima Clark, kind of like an icon. The Septima Clark Learning Center at Highlander. So hopefully we get to visit Highlander when we go out there. I also ordered the Septima Clark book from Highlander, and hopefully get a chance to read that too. So I really like this one. To live here, you have to fight. This book just came out not too long ago. I think it was just published this year. It's called Y'all Means All, The Emerging Voices Queering Appalachia. And it's a compilation of essays. Most of them are essays. And the editor is Z. Zane McNeil. A lot of the writers are queer and trans. I think most of them are queer and trans. And it's broken up into sections. Finding self and discovering queer in Appalachia, queer hills, hollers, and mountain people, and then creating the queer Appalachian archive is the 3 sections. And kind of focuses on the intersection between queer identity and Appalachian identity. I think it does best when it allows the individuals who are forming this archive and living this experience and to tell their own stories, right? It kind of their narratives. Some of it is a little bit, kind of academic, a little bit divorced from that kind of on the ground reality. The other thing that it really kind of highlights is the Queer Appalachia Instagram account. So there's that kind of social media, internet, where place on the internet where culture takes on a life of its own. So they really talk. There's several essays actually that either touch on or focus on the Queer Appalachia Instagram account, which was interesting. So what else would I want to say about this one? Overall it was a really good read. Like I said, some of the essays were better than others. Sometimes I think some of the authors tended to essentialize a little bit, which I'm not a big fan of. There's an essay about Mothman, which talks about queer Mothman, which also kind of interesting too. But yeah, definitely thought-provoking, and definitely it's very nice to see queer folks, transgender folks, non-gender conforming activists and writers having a voice, especially in book form. This one's out on PM Press. I got it directly from PM. I suggest that people, sign up for their mailing list and join as friends of PM Press because they're constantly putting out really good books, and I think more people need to read them. This is Y'all Means All: The Emerging Voices Queering Appalachia. I think it was right after finishing this one, I read My Own Country, because it was referenced in Y'all Means All in an essay about Johnson City, which is not too far from where we're going in Tennessee. And this is it's called My Own Country. The subtitle is A Doctor's Story, and it's by Abraham Verghese. This made a big splash. I don't think it quite made the New York Times bestseller list, but it was up there when it was published, I think in the late 90s. It was originally published, but it basically is about this a doctor who's an infectious disease specialist taking on AIDS patients in Appalachia, in rural Tennessee, in Johnson City. Well, it's a city, but it's definitely surrounded by rural areas, but not too far from the hollers of Appalachia. And his story is very interesting in itself. He talks a little bit about being born in Ethiopia, parents from India. They were from Kerala, but they were Christians, and studying in Europe and in the United States, and then leaving and coming back, working with the VA. So he kind of had a dual appointment. He was working with the VA and another public hospital, and then he had he was in private practice like 1 day a week. And because of him and his kind of non-judgmental approach to treating gay men, because that was most of who had AIDS at that time, that Johnson City kind of became a focal point for the AIDS crisis. People from the region and who had been in the diaspora, a lot of times people who were not accepted by their families because they were queer, went to go live in Atlanta or New York or San Francisco, become infected with the virus, have nowhere to go after that, and come back to live with their families back in Johnson City or the area. Is kind of interesting study of how of homecoming, and of him kind of coming to be accepted as an American, really, because he goes through the whole naturalization process and whatnot, and he's got his own family struggles. But the guy's a really good writer. He's written a couple of other books since then. I think mostly memoirs and things. He's got stuff out on YouTube focusing on the doctor-patient relationship, which is one thing that you see very clearly. He tells his patients' stories, but he tells them in a way that you can really tell that he's really developed that personal relationship with them, which is really important for health and for the provision of healthcare. So this was a very moving book, very good. My Own Country, Dr. Abraham Verghese. And the last book in this section is called, kind of ties into what we were talking about with To Live Here You Have to Fight. It's called Gone Home. The subtitle is Race and Roots Through Appalachia, and the author is Corita L. Brown, and she actually teaches at UCLA, sociology and African American studies here at UCLA. This is a book about African American. It's really a book about what is it? Basically identity and coming to have a collective identity as African Americans in Appalachia, in mining towns in Harlan County, in eastern Kentucky. So what she did was actually, her parents were from that area, and so that was her connection to this area. And she participated. They have like this kind of ritual of going back on Memorial Day or other days of the year, even though the towns are not really there anymore. They're kind of ghost towns. So through those family networks, she was able to contact people who had gone through the experience of growing up in these coal towns in Harlan County and nearby, and was able to interview something like 76 people. Most of them were people that were kids back then. And what was a lot of remembered moving there from out of the South mostly, and studying there, and then moving out. And one of the things that happened while they were there was integration, school integration. So there's a big focus on Brown v. Board, and this all due haste that the schools were told to integrate with. So integration being part of that experience, and then also brings it up to date about how now they have got this Eastern Kentucky social club that bought the old segregated school, and they use it for social events, and they have a network of alumni, and they rotate their gatherings, and it's one way that they've managed to preserve that sense of community through the gatherings. They put together an archive which she donated to one of the universities there nearby. I think it was Chapel Hill. And so kind of telling the other side of the story. She didn't talk much about the labor struggles. Very kind of mentioned just in passing. Really more focuses on community creation and identity creation. So this was a good read too. Very much rooted in a Du Boisian type of sociology. So this one's called Gone Home by Karita Brown, and this one's out on the University of North Carolina Press. Definitely adds something to our study of Appalachia and study of African American history and culture and race relations in general. So I enjoyed this one too. And I think that does it for our book reviews today. Let me know what you think about the reviews, the books, if you've read any of them. Did you like them? Feel free to leave your comments. Click follow, click the little bell so you can get updates about any other videos that get published, another 6 months or whenever. Because with a 2-year-old, it's hard to publish these often, but we do what we can, and we definitely appreciate your viewership. Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.